what was so tedious in terms of the user experience and the friction involved that you used to just not do it at all. The value you were getting from it was zero. And by applying AI, you end up making the cost negligible. And the result isn't you've saved some money. The result is the thing you weren't doing at all before, now you're doing it a huge amount. You were getting zero value from this process that theoretically could have existed, but now you're getting almost unbounded value because you can just keep running it on repeat and just turn on the faucet and it's just going to run. That new value discovery is where the real opportunity is.
Welcome to LaunchPod AI, the show from LogRocket where we sit down with top product and digital leaders to talk real practical ways they're using AI with their teams to move faster and be smarter. Today, we're joined again by Nan Yu, VP of Product at Linear. I'll be honest, this conversation skewed to the future almost immediately, but there's few better than Nan to talk about what AI means for the future of product. He shares why you're wrong to think of AI as a way to reduce costs and why the real value is in enabling a new work that was previously impossible, the three must-haves he's deduced from across the most successful AI products to produce consistently great user outcomes, and the behind-the-scenes details of Linear's new agent interaction guidelines. So here's our episode with Nan Yu. All right, what's up, Nan? How you doing, man? Glad to have you back on the show.
Yeah, good to be back, Jeff.
I think you're a guy who generally needs no introduction in the circles of people who are probably going to listen to the show. You lead product over at Linear, doing cool stuff on AI. You guys launched a cool guidelines to agent interaction and generally been at the forefront of people who are really into product management. If you don't know Linear, you're not one of the cool kids, I'd say. But yeah, let's just dive into them. You laid out this kind of view of, at heart, a lot of AI tools are just kind of like harnesses. Can you maybe explain that for a sec?
Yeah, for sure. No, I think like we're all very accustomed to interacting with models in a direct way now, right? All of the sort of chat interfaces where you're typing in stuff from scratch and prompting models and having them do stuff for you. But if you look at, the tools that have been adopted, even like the chat interfaces, right? That's essentially a sort of UI harness in order to utilize, right, underlying models. So you can think of that chat interface being a harness. You can think of something like Cursor being a harness, right? There's all sorts of prompting and context engineering and automations and stuff being run underneath the covers every single time you say anything into Cursor. And you can think of harnesses as that sort of embedded set of instructions, but also some sort of baked in streams of context and data, right? So for something like Cursor, it would be like, hey, you have your whole code base, right? That's part of fundamental set of context that it's constantly examining and kind of working over in order to achieve the result that you want, right? And if you kind of switch gears and you look at something else that has very good adoption like Granola, it's a very similar kind of story where there's an underlying kind of data stream. There's a sort of automated set of processes that it goes through. There's almost like a rigid set of instructions that it utilizes for in order to set correct expectations, right? You know what's going to come out the other end of it, and you know that in the middle of that, there's a model doing a lot of work, but it's really all of the sort of kind of context harnessing around the model that makes this an interesting app, an interesting workflow.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all had the experience probably early on of let's just try to go straight at it and say, hey, do this thing. And like you said, there's no kind of context around it. There's no direction. There's nothing to it. And the models kind of suck at just being intelligent. You got into a bit of this, but like that kind of seems to weigh into how Linear thought about what does AI mean in this world for how do you build great product with AI and how do you think about incorporating it?
Even if you kind of zoom out a little bit, right, and think about what is the process of developing an AI powered application.
I think that's what everyone's kind of trying to figure out right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think it starts off with you playing around inside of a sort of general chatbot kind of interface, right? You can use Claude or ChatGPT or whatever. And you have a bunch of context in front of you, like in the form of like documents and canned prompts and all this kind of stuff. And you're just like copy pasting up a storm. You're kind of step by step trying stuff to try to get yourself a result. And in order to have any hope of having a good scalable outcome, you have to have a single example of a good result, right? And you can prompt and reprompt and mess around with stuff all you want, right? But you have to get it to a point to say, look, it's possible to go from whatever my input sources are into, the sort of fully transformed version of the output, right? And when you're messing around a chatbot, it could just be like a JSON output or something like that. But okay, now that you kind of have that kind of golden path traced out, the next question is like, how do I make this repeatable, right? Because I think a lot of the disappointment that people have trying to deploy AI at scale in organizations is that it's just not repeatable. Someone might have an interesting result once or twice, or someone with really good technique knows what to do, but it's so tedious. There's a huge skill ramp you need everyone to go through. Deployment is extremely uneven, right? Some people get a lot of value out of it, but it's going to follow like a power law, right? A couple of people are going to be super great at it, and then the median result is just going to be fairly disappointing. So when you're building apps that are AI powered, what you really want to do is to say, okay, how do I like get the median outcome to be really good? And that's all about building the correct harness so that all your user is doing is, kind of validating outputs and pointing it at the right data sources to begin with.
I think we've all seen the LinkedIn posts around this is, the magic thing I set up in 97 steps that I was able to get rid of my entire, XYZ team with and, save $20 trillion or $20 million or whatever. And then, they'll send it to you. I've tried a few of them and just played around with it. And generally the output is not even good at best often. That's what goes from it being a good process for, I'm sure it works for them. It's optimized for exactly the thing that one person, that one team does, but building the product is how do you make that kind of work across a lot of different people, a lot of different contexts, or account for all of that and make sure you have the harness where you're picking the right models, giving it the right input, like you said, giving it the right JSON formats if needed, or specifying the JSON outputs to move to the next step. There's a million little steps that, you got to be really, really dialed in on to make it great.
And it's real engineering work, right? I think that's the other part of it. Like people kind of hand wave this stuff and they say, oh, look, I set up this like 95 step automation process and it totally works, except it's brittle. It's not durable to changes in the environment. You can't reproduce it across multiple people. And there's this big kind of story people tell around cost savings. And I think that cost savings is like kind of the most uninteresting story by itself, because cost savings is, okay, you were spending $100 and now you're spending 10. Okay, you saved $90, great. But then what's next? $90, it's not going to change the world, right? What you need to do is ask the question about what was so tedious and what was so bad in terms of the user experience and the friction involved that you used to just not do it at all, right? The value you were getting from it was zero. And by applying AI in a well-harnessed manner, you end up making the cost negligible, like free-ish. And the result isn't you've saved some money. The result is the thing you weren't doing at all before, now you're doing it a huge amount. You were getting zero value from this process that theoretically could have existed, but now you're getting almost unbounded value because you can just keep running it on repeat and just turn on the faucet and it's just going to run. It's like that sort of new value discovery is where I think the real opportunity is.
This is something that's been near and dear to our hearts at LogRocket, right? Because we built session replay software. The good part is that when something breaks, you can see it, you can look at it, you can figure out why it broke, you can see what happened to the user. The bad news is even if you have, a couple million sessions a month or even a couple tens of thousands, there's no world you're going to watch that in. Not even close. I've said this since I got here in 2018. Watching sessions is kind of a stupid use of time, but we worked really hard to build basically the agent that can watch the sessions for you and tell you what's important. And now you can get value out of, you have 10 million sessions. You can figure out what's going on in the 10 million and what you actually need to look at. Like you said, you didn't do it before because it just wasn't worth the time to sit there and watch hours and hours and hours of sessions. And I think I was playing around with it and like had a query that watched 24 hours of replay in 5 seconds for me and found some interesting things about conversion and friction. That's the level of gain we're talking about here that people should be looking for. Not, like you said, can I save $90 on a $100 fee?
There's two aspects of this that I think are sort of underappreciated, right? One of them is consistency. Even if let's say you're like, oh, I have an unlimited budget. I'm going to hire an army of people to watch videos, to watch replays and for them to report back. Now, those 100 people you hire, those 1,000 people that you hire, they're all going to have a different point of view on what it means to have a user interaction or whatever it is. And like they're going to come back with reports, but the reports are not going to be internally consistent.
Humans are humans.
Yeah, there's so much variation, right, across each person. So even if you could bear the cost, which is, we're talking about stuff that you wouldn't bear the cost, but even if you could, the results wouldn't be very good. They would just have no internal consistency. If you have a model doing all of this work, it's going to run through the same prompt every single time. It's going to be based on the same base model. And if you tune the heat to the right level, you're going to have apples to apples across multiple session replays or whatever it is that you're looking for. So the kind of scalability that you get out of it wasn't really even achievable before, right? If you could have unlimited money and it was going to help. And I think the other way to think about why this is a powerful and interesting thing to do is computers are they intelligent? Yeah, they're intelligent. But more important than that they have intelligence, they were always really diligent. They were always able to just have infinite patience and always pay attention and do the same thing 1,000 times or whatever it is, right? They're truly superhuman in terms of their diligence. But the thing that, that harms harnessing lets you do is that it lets you apply the sort of diligence that computers innately come with. They can look at a session replay the moment it's finished every time, no matter from what time zone, in a fully consistent manner. A different kind of promise than you're able to do with a human workforce trying to do the same thing.
And that applies to a lot of places, right? Like you can start to understand, you say maybe on your guys' side for tickets, like this is this kind of ticket or this is describing this kind of issue or moving this feature set. And it can start to, computers were, like you said, infinitely diligent. They'd sit there, they had more patience than anyone could ever hope to have, but they were kind of like super linear and deterministic. If you do it right, you're operating in a non-deterministic way, but you can kind of close the bounds a bit of how wide that determinism goes. You're not always getting the same answer, but you can generally with the same inputs, you'll be able to get about the same answer, and you can categorize it and do things like that were just untenable before. And now you can kind of marry that diligence and determinism, or kind of medium determinism if you do it right. I think where you get completely wild answers and diligence is not useful. But I think that brings up an interesting point, which is cool. So it used to be you coded something and it was A to B to C to D. There was a workflow. It was immutable. It was what it was until you recoded it. Now with this kind of wider area of where you might land from any input, it feels like at some level the discipline you practice, and I guess a lot of the teams you serve too, kind of changes the goalposts. Like you can ship something and the UI looks great and it looks fine, but it's mostly, you brought this up the other day, like it's a chat box. You can put it there. It's what comes out the other end that matters. So like the job isn't done when you ship anymore. The job is now, did you do the right thing? Did you build it good? And that takes time to prove.
Yeah. I think it's hard. We haven't even developed like the language around this. Right?
Yeah.
We can say these general things like, oh, is the quality of the response good? Right. Is the quality of
That's totally, I'm going to blame my lack of sentencing right there on. It's just, we haven't developed the language around it. I just completely didn't get it together.
Yeah. I mean, in all honesty, we haven't, right? Because I think the whole concept of shipping software has changed. Like software used to be like primarily about the data model and the UI, right? If you nail the data model and you have the right UI, then that's like the ceiling of what you could hope for, basically. And now it's, well, the data model is a blob of text and the UI is, just a text output or a very simple input output kind of setup. So none of that is very complicated. There's no new invention happening there, really. It's just a matter of the right text comes out. I talk to my marketing team about this all the time. They're like, hey, when can we market this thing that we're developing? I'm like, look, I don't know. We're done with the UI, right? We're done with hooking up all the data and things like that. So we're getting results, but like we have to first learn if the results are any good and, and understand when the results are good and when they're not. And like that part of it is, it's hard to even discuss. You can talk about like evals and things like that, but like evals only get you so far. A big part of this is trying to run it against a lot of test data and, kind of canary deployments and things like that and try to figure out like, are people like getting good use out of this?
That actually brings up a good question. Like how have you guys tackled that there? Because like you said, you can ship UI all you want. You can have the wrapper of the feature. This has been, a thing that we ran into hard for you guys. There's probably a whole process there as well. You guys have talked publicly that you use your own features before you launch it, but obviously there's more than just using your own stuff because there's a wide world out there. What does that look like?
It's a combination of techniques. Honestly, it looks a lot like how a lot of like consumer applications are managed, where you have to get qualitative feedback from people who are using it and they're like, how do you feel about it? When does it make you feel good? When does it make you feel bad? There's more statistical methods where you define some kind of performance goals and you kind of see what conversion rates and things like that are. And, so you have to look for like moments where there's some signal of feedback from the user. And it can't be like, oh, give me thumbs up, thumbs down. It can't be that, right? Because like, no one opts into that.
Crap.
That's not good enough, right? There has to be some signal about, hey, is the result that I'm providing you providing value? And if, you have to instrument something that tells you that, and you might have to get creative with it, right? So we have a thing, for example, that helps you write project updates. So like things that we can analyze on there are things like, are the engagement on the ones that were assisted, are they as good as the ones that were written completely organically? What's the edit distance when we offer a suggestion? Are people accepting it verbatim, or are they going in and they're editing it? And what's the right edit distance, right? Because if people are just copy pasting, then who knows if they like it or not, right? But are they going in and they're tweaking little bits? Oh yeah, that's kind of mostly right. I'm just going to tweak it a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of what we're looking for. So there's these kinds of behaviors that you have to tease out of the system to really give an honest evaluation, right? Of, am I actually providing value in this instance?
There's a guy, Ajit Desway, who has done a lot of events around the country with us and has been on the podcast. He called it tweak time, which I thought was a really interesting kind of way of looking, right? How do you measure, is the output right? And the more I've kind of dove into the subject, the more you start to realize like there are a lot of things where 0 is a bad answer. Too high is obviously a really bad answer. Right? Like you said, if they're going in and rewriting the whole thing, that's terrible. But if they're going in and just copy pasting, it's one of two things, right? You either got it dead on perfect, which just seems unlikely. People have taste, people have like their own way they want to write, or they're just copy pasting and going, and it seems more likely it's that. One thing I've seen and that we've used here a bit has just been work deeply with customers and ask them, like, is this good? How much are you finding is wrong? Do you trust it?
I think the other thing that, again, it's very, very like consumer products, right? Which is you kind of have to watch people use it a little bit and to sort of see what, see what they do with it and how they interact and what are they doing to work around the quirks and intricacies and things like that. Because it's very easy, right? Like there used to be this really cheap way to measure if something was good, which is just engagement. Like, hey, I have a blogging platform. How many words did you write is like a good measure of how much value you were kind of putting into it or whatever. How many posts did you make? How many, how many, how many? It's like how many isn't good anymore, right? You can generate infinite amounts of stuff with AI and LLMs. So you can't do the cheap thing and say how many, right? You kind of have to like watch people do stuff like, okay, are they just like shoving a bunch of slop into the world and then calling it a day and not really thinking about stuff? Or are they actually utilizing your tools to create valuable work? And I think that's something where, again, we're kind of at the beginning of being able to sort of measure that stuff. But on the topic of session replays, observing people use it directly is a useful way to do it as well.
I've spent innumerable hours over the past several months just talking to people and walking through, this is as they've got, new feature sets into their deployment. How is it? Show me how you use it. What's problematic? What has been the output? Or just, walk through it. Just show me how you use it. Don't even think I'm here. I think nothing's going to ever replace that. You bring up, I think the other thing people need to think about when it comes to building AI tools is at some level, we're seeing, yes, UIs are simplifying and right, you just have the chat box or something like that. But also in a lot of places, it's kind of disappearing and the work, there's no more proof of work. There's no more, visualization of these things happening. Are you worried at all about when it starts to be too automatic or too just magical, people start to take it for granted?
It's been interesting to me to see how fast we've done the speed run of claim everything is AI powered to no, you can't even talk about that anymore because it's so table stakes.
Yeah, that was like less than a year.
Yeah. It was hyper fast. And so I think that, look, at the end of the day, if you're providing value for people in terms of the output, they'll buy your service. I kind of did this thought experiment about, let's say you were trying to create some kind of lead gen tool, right? Like for sales or something like that. And we used to think about it as like, oh yeah, well, here's an entry field that you could type stuff into and maybe you can connect it to some sources for enrichment like LinkedIn or something like that. But like ultimately you want leads to show up. So if you turn on the tool and you say go and then leads start coming in and they're good leads, like sure, there's all sorts of magic happening right at the end of the day, but you just care about having the result. You're paying for the result, right? That thing they say about, oh, people don't buy 1/4-inch drill bits, they buy 1/4-inch holes in their wall. And it's, yeah, true, right? What's way better than going to the hardware store, buying the drill bit, putting my drill, doing the work is, hey, that'd be nice if there's a hole right there and then it just showed up. If I could do that, then that's way superior, right? And I think that we're having this moment in software where that's basically what's happening.
I think last time we talked, you talked about one of the things that Linear really looks at is developer engagement, because you want to be the tool that engineers are engaged with and that's a core part of their day-to-day kind of existence. And this kind of evaporates that at some level, right? How do you think about, that mission or that thought process or guiding principle along with, a lot of what AI is doing is removing the need for people to actually physically or, digitally engage with a lot of these tools?
This kind of relates to what I said earlier about like there's no cheap way to measure value anymore. You can't just do counting stats and hope that that's enough, right? You have to go a step further in understanding value, or you just have to think about it and use different proxies. So when we think about how often people use Linear and what they do with it, it's not like more time spent in the tool is better for us. That's generally not what we want. Engineers are probably working, these days it's a little bit different now, right? They used to be working their IDEs, primarily, but now they might be like prompting agents instead of Linear even, right? That'll happen too. But it's not, hey, we released like a feature for dashboards and I need people to make a ton of dashboards and spend their life in dashboards or anything like that. That's not the right way to think about the sort of value that's being gained from that, right? You have to kind of back up further and say, okay, what's the natural kind of cadence to use this? What's the concentration that we expect in organizations in terms of getting value from these things? And, think a little bit critically about that, right? And understand that as long as they're getting the result that they want, and as long as there's a regular engagement with your tool, that's probably a good starting point, right? You don't have to try to over optimize and sort of pump up numbers, because pumping numbers is like really easy now.
If you're enjoying LaunchPod, the best way you can show support is simple. Follow the show so you never miss an episode, leave us a quick review to help more product leaders find it, and share this episode with a friend or colleague who'd get value from it. Every follow, review, and share really helps us grow. Two things I want to kind of make sure we cover still. You guys put out these agent interaction guidelines, which I thought were really neat. It was a really cool set of things that I think it's important for people to keep in mind. I won't read through the whole thing, but the one that really, really stuck with me, and I think I saw you post about it, is that an agent can't be held accountable. What brought you guys to put this out? Like, it's 6 kind of really tight guidelines here. Like you said, agent can be held accountable, but it also goes behavioral, right? Agent should disclose that it's an agent if you're interacting with it and all these kind of things. What was the thought behind this?
The impetus of it was we opened up Linear as a platform for agents agents to live within and operate within. And, we went into it sort of naively thinking that, hey, you could just treat agents like other users, right? That would be like a really easy on-ramp for people. You could interact with them through text in the same way you interact with like a coworker. And that's a very appealing kind of story to think about. Then we start seeing a lot of developers and vendors start building agents and having them live inside of Linear. And you quickly understand that there's a new set of problems that everyone has
Mm.
to solve, that everyone's running into the same kind of like UX barriers and the same kind of frictions
Mhm.
and uncertainties. So we wanted to write something that says, look, this is what we've been learning from working with a lot of different developers. So if you're writing an agent for the first time and trying to intuit how it should behave, here's a set of principles to kind of start with. And the last one, I think the most important one, is that an agent can't be held accountable, right? If you let an agent run loose in your system and it does a bunch of stuff that you don't like, there's no one to blame but yourself. You can't blame the agent. The agent doesn't understand responsibility. And I think that that's something that is really important to keep in mind when thinking about what kinds of abilities and what kinds of restraints, right, to put on these kinds of agentic systems.
The onus is on you, right? At some
Yeah,
level, you're responsible. If you create the agent, it goes haywire. You can't blame something
yeah,
else. But definitely a good doc. Like I said, I don't want to spoiler the whole thing because people should go check it out. There's good thoughts though too, and also if you are building with AI, read through, because if you're trying to build it into your product, it helps kind of give a couple interesting points on like how you should think about these things inhabiting your product, right? The idea around the agent should inhabit your platform natively. I think we've all kind of seen like the bolt-on thing that doesn't really do anything useful. That seems more almost like product tip than really, the same level as you can't blame an agent. That just seems more like build well versus kind of a safety or kind of blame thing.
I think some of these items, including that last one, we've tried to make it a sort of native aspect of the platform that we're building, right? So for the accountability one, right, like we started off with this concept that you can assign an issue to an agent, right? It would just inhabit the assignee spot in the same way that a person would. And we shifted towards a concept we call like delegation, where the person that's responsible is you, it's Jeff, it's Nan. And even if you've asked an agent to do the work, right, it's just your sidekick. It shows up on the ticket, but it shows up as a secondary assignee, so to speak. And that way you can understand, where you're going to be looking to in terms of finding the result, but you are the primary person who is responsible for the completion and the outcome of that particular issue.
That's a really interesting kind of like output, this general guideline, because we had someone from like a medical tech company, and what they had done is they built basically the Zoom summarizer, but that for doctor-patient interactions. And so, it took all that and did it in a HIPAA safe way and made sure not to pass certain data. But it summarized the appointment so the doctors didn't have to sit there taking notes while you were talking. They could pay more attention. It recorded the deals of what you as a patient would say. So, the doctor had a good record, but also it took note of like prescriptions the doctor wanted to give and the kind of treatment plans and things like that to ensure that it was applied correctly. But at the end, none of that could be entered into the actual system of record without the doctor approving it. The doctor had to look at the notes and say, yes, that's accurate. The doctor had to look, oh, thank goodness, had to look at the prescription and say, yes, that's correct.
Like these kinds of things result in changes in people's behavior, right? And also in changes like emphasis on what people's jobs actually are. Because like with engineers, it's so much of your work now is reviewing generated code. And so being a good code reviewer is now like such a core skill for engineers who want to use the latest tools and want to be on the cutting edge and be the most productive and things like that. That was never the emphasis. The emphasis is always like generating original code, right? Hey, here's a math problem, go and write the solution or whatever. But that's just not even a facsimile of how people's jobs get done anymore. I don't think we've caught up socially, right? I don't think interview processes have caught up, except for maybe very early stage startups. And I don't think that we've, as a community, really kind of acknowledged this yet. We're starting to see it like happen like very quickly.
What does this actually mean when, as more and more and more code is being produced by these kind of adjunct tools or copilots, or depending on your process, right? It seems like there's companies, especially newer ones, that from the scratch, they were very small when this stuff kind of happened. They were able to really adopt it, and it's kind of built in, and they're just flying along. I can't imagine that's the same, not even because some of these bigger companies are a little older or slower, but just there's so much context to have in some of these huge code bases of these older legacy tools. I don't think at some of those companies it is the same thing reviewing, because to write the code, the agents don't have the context window. Maybe now they're just starting to, but do you think we're going to see kind of a difference there, or a stratification of how people operate that way?
I think there's a convergence, in all honesty, right? Because no one's really expecting these things to hold the entire code base in context. So it's all about like, how is it able to use like code search tools? How is it able to selectively think about certain files and forget other ones? Those sorts of more dynamic techniques that are sort of naturally either part of the the harness or part of the fundamental behavior of the agent itself. So I think that there's a lot of those kinds of things which kind of mitigate that, right? Like in terms of a pure context window thing. That said, there are certain patterns which are much easier for AI to reason about, right? If you have more direct implementations, if you're using libraries that are fairly common and in the training set, and versus you have a ton of weird indirection that only like the one genius at your company like understands, right? And you're one of those situations, right? That's always going to be hard. That's hard for people, right, to deal with, and it's especially hard for coding agents as well.
One thing more for the product team that we've seen is just this move to being able to move a lot faster. The time it takes to write 1,000 lines of code used to be quite a while. You can put together kind of a framework or an early idea for something. Like the cost of failing is a lot lower, or the cost of failing at an early idea is way, way lower. How have you guys looked at that? Or like, how's that affected over at Linear? Like, how does, that kind of, whatever you want to call it, vibe coding, prototyping, or any implementation, of the rough idea there?
It's affected it in sort of two specific ways. The first one is you don't have to distract engineers anymore. People just, here's a way to distract an engineer. Hey, Jeff, I thought the code was supposed to work like this, but the behavior seems a little different. What's going on in there? Do we have the right case statements? I don't have to ask you that question. I can ask a coding agent, hey, the same question basically, and be like, tell me exactly how this is supposed to work because I'm seeing this thing. And they go, yeah. And then it'll tell you like, here's what's the code does here. It seems like it's doing this on purpose, or no, it seems like there's a bug in this area because there's like a missing case statement or something like that, right? That's something it could verify for you. I didn't have to take somebody out of their flow state and have them do a little side quest and think about it. And small changes, like trivial changes, hey, let's change the padding here, let's update some copy. Those kinds of things, like our designers are just doing directly. You can call that vibe coding, you can call that whatever it is, right? But it's just, they're just, they're not even like opening up a IDE or a cursor or whatever it is, right? They're literally like in Linear, like mentioning one of our coding agents. It could be Cursor or CodeGen or Charlie or whoever. And they'll say, hey, here's what I want to do on this screen, change the padding here, here's the color. And they can specify to their heart's intent, right? They can be real nitpicky about stuff. And again, infinite patience, right? The designer can be super precise and no detail will be missed. So I think that's one big way where you're increasing productivity because you're just not distracting your core developers, and also you're getting stuff done and getting value in a way where you couldn't before. And then the other thing we were talking about, reducing risk. Yeah, you can try new stuff. Like designer can go in there and be like, hey, I want to try this completely kind of divergent idea. Just make me a prototype for that. Just like in the current code base, make a prototype. Let's deploy like a canary branch and let's just see how it feels. And like you could have asked an engineer to do that before. Like you could have, but they'll kind of give you a side eye. They'll be like, okay, you really want to try this? I mean, it's going to take me like a few hours. Is that really what we want to do? I got other things to do, man. And then you might have said, okay, yeah, forget about it, because maybe there's only a 10% chance that it would have worked out. And like, you're like, look, I'm not going to waste a day of somebody for a 10% good outcome. But in the good outcome case, it might be really good, right? Like you might want to try that. So now you just can try it, right? And then if it feels promising, then you can be, hey, look, this feels pretty promising, right? If we make some couple tweaks, then I think we can actually like take this to production. That's a much more fun conversation to have with a senior developer, right? Then can you try my harebrained idea?
Yeah, because that's the thing, right? Like if you have 10% ideas, one of them's probably gonna hit it if they all have high payoff. But in the past, running 10% ideas is probably a great way to get an engineering leader or worse to come down on you pretty hard. Because engineering time's expensive, or it was. But when the cost of new ideas is low, try everything. See what you can do. Is try the wacky idea that has a low chance but high payoff. And I think we'll see some pretty cool stuff coming out as a result.
Yeah, and I think this was the dynamic that we're talking about, right? It's not something that you were doing already and we made it cheaper, right? It's something that you weren't even going to do it in the first place. You're getting value where there wasn't value before.
Yeah, exactly. One last question. One thing that has come up, I feel like again and again, and it's across industry, it's across function, it's like everywhere, is people talking about this idea, this 98 step thing replaced this entire junior team. Like people are talking about, do we hire less junior people? Do you not hire junior people? Do we not need that function anymore? Because a lot of that, for better or for worse, a lot of what that role often did in teams was the kind of more manual, repetitive stuff that you did make the case like, all right, this is worth doing and having a person do, but it's not fun. It's like, it was just throw a junior person at, and it was part of a training path to get, up more. But if we remove all that, great, we save some money now. But in 10 years, I think everyone hates to think about the fact that we were all, you and I and everyone was once, that bright-eyed kid coming in for the first time going, what do I do? And we had to learn somewhere. And that was part of learning. And if you stop having those jobs, we're going to find ourselves short of some people in about 10 years.
I think a lot of people talk about just conceptually this idea about, hey, AI is replacing junior level work and it's going to reduce the incentive to hire young people, right? Like, that's kind of what they're saying. And I don't know. I'm fairly skeptical of that argument. I think that you might find some localized instances where that happens, but we're about to have a generation of new employees fresh out of college who have spent their entire high school and college with ChatGPT as just like part of their life. It's a thing they took for granted when they were trying to do work. I think that they understand how to leverage these tools way better than the folks with more experience in the industry. It's the thing they reach for, right? When Toby over at Shopify says, "Hey, we need to reflexively reach for AI as our tool." He's, kind of like forcing people to do it and putting incentives in place in their payrolls and all that kind of stuff, right? But with these junior guys, this is just what they do anyway. You don't need to tell them. I think that companies are going to find that they have a lot to learn from folks that might not have as much experience in the workforce, but they are native to using AI tools and to utilizing models in creative ways in every aspect of their work, personal life. I think that we're definitely reacting to the very early stages, but you kind of have to let the story play out a little bit. And especially if you're projecting 10 years, it's like in technology, projecting 10 years out is a little bit impossible.
In tech, 10 years is basically forever. And given the accelerated pace we've seen from developments since, GPT-3 came out in 2023 to now,
Yeah,
10 years sounds like it's almost a millennia at that point.
Yeah.
So, who knows? I generally think it'll be okay. I got my 12-year-old using Lovable, and he sat down and I think whipped out a off-brand version of Flappy Bird in about 2.5 minutes. I was like, oh, that's, you know this better than I do already. So there we go. Well, Nan, I always love having you come on. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for walking through both how you guys at Linear are looking at a lot of this stuff, but also just generally, what does this mean and the kind of idea of harnessing AI and building the framework around it? How do we look at engagement? What does it mean? And how do we kind of operate and build great tools? Because I think we are still really at the beginning, and forget 10 years, 10 months down the road, it's going to be completely different. So this is great, man. If people want to kind of ask further questions or even just say, hey, that was great, good job. Is LinkedIn the best place to reach out? Is there a better spot?
Probably on X is probably the best place. My handle is the Nan Yu, TheNanyu. I'm pretty active. My DMs are open. You can find me there.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. This is a blast. And yeah, hopefully keep in touch.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff.